for you, the different skills that we've taught you in this class, and put them all together sort of into a big picture and how they all fit together. And then we're also going to be talking about planning and about documentation. Because in this class, we're trying to give you all the skills, all the things that you need to be able to be a counselor or a coach. So we'll talk about those things. So what are the basic skills that you need to do a structured interview? We basically give them all to you. And then we start out by talking about attending, we've talked about listening, we've talked about reflecting back, we've talked about paraphrasing, about summarizing, we've talked about connecting and analysis. And you're going to find that all of those things are the different pieces of the puzzle that we need to stick together to come up with the different kinds of interviewing that you might do for these different situations in your life. What are our goals? To understand some of the problems in integrating these skills, to review the skills as part of a basic learning sequence, to define the structure of an effective interview, to demonstrate the integration of these skills, and to use the 5-stage structure of an interview. So we'll give you all of those pieces. And this will be sort of more general, but then I'll give you a more specific way of looking at the different things. What are problems that people have in the area of integration? One of the problems is that when we teach you each one of these skills, and you sort of focus on it, and then we have you do it, you go, I can't think, I can't talk, I can't do, I can't. It actually makes it worse for a while. And now what we want to do is take those, you maybe struggled with doing each one of those, trying to do them so specific and so right and everything else. Now we want those all to integrate and become a complete whole when you're not thinking. Let's see now, what are the different types of questions? Now, am I going to use these different kind of questions? What should I do now? That you just react to the person and all these skills all come together and integrate. In your book, they use the millipede example. And they talk about, here's a millipede going along with all of its many, many legs. And we stop the millipede and we say, how do you do that? Which leg goes before which one? And now the millipede can't walk because he stumbles over trying to figure out which leg he's going to do. But if we just let him alone, he'll just sort of do it. And that's what we sort of want. We want you to sort of just integrate, to just let those things just sort of all happen. This temporary decrease in natural skills as you focus on each one is automatic, normal. So don't be afraid of that. We must practice the basics for integration. See, think about a baseball player. Well, you practice batting, right? And then you practice catching. You practice different kinds of catching. Well, in the middle of the game, those all have to just come together. And you just go up there and you just do those things. The ball comes to you. You don't think. Let's see. Now I hold the ball exactly this right. Let's see. Turn it here. Let's see. Now I need to aim it right for that glove of that guy over there. Let's see. Now which one do I throw it to? By that time, they made a home run. You've already ran all the way into the bases. Now you've got to just be able to take that thing and throw it without almost thinking about it. And that's what needs to happen here. Eventually, there's a significant increase beyond the natural level if you continue to practice. Now, one of the things we need to teach you today is a basic listening sequence. What are the things, if we put all these skills together in a sequence, what would that look like? And the one they give you from your attending book is questioning, encouraging, paraphrasing, reflecting of feelings, and then summarization. Obviously, we can't summarize until we have the data, right? Now, does it have to be exact in that order? No. Different situations are going to be slightly different, but you're going to be using all of those skills together. And then they give you a 5-stage interview planning process. If you want to put the interview together, we're interviewing this person, whether it's coaching, counseling, whatever it is, gathering information. The first one they call rapport and structuring. It's like this. Hello? Let me tell you what we're going to do in this session. You're developing a working relationship with a client. You're defining the structure, the general purpose, generating the atmosphere of trust, and so on. Now, from our skills that we taught you, which skills would be here? So think about it. Which would be the skills that we would have? I'm going to suggest attending and connecting. The connecting skill, putting everything together, but also the attending skill. That's what we do initially to convince them that we really care, that we're really interested. We want to listen more than talk, if possible. And we have to do all the connecting stuff we talked about in the session. We talked about it connecting. The next step of these 5 stages, that's stage 1. Stage 2, gathering information, defining the problem, and identifying the assets. We might say, how can I help? What are some of your strengths if we're doing coaching? Now, what would those skills be? The skills that we talked about, what would be the skills that fit into that one? How about observing, questioning, particularly we're gathering data, and responding to feelings. We're trying to figure out what their feelings are to get all of this data and put it all together. So do you see that gap? So we have the rapport, the structuring. Now we have the gathering information. The next step of this five stages, or the next stage, is determining the outcome. What do you want to have happen? What's the one that would fit here? I'm suggesting the analysis one. We got to figure out what's going on. What is this person's dream if we're doing coaching? Or what's going on with this client? What's the underlying problem? And that was the session we had on analysis. Number 4, they call exploring alternatives and generating solutions. What would be the skill here? Well, probably all of these skills, but primarily summarizing. We got to come up with some alternatives here, something that we can put together that's actually going to work, that's actually going to make a difference in this person. Another term for this might be brainstorming. What are the possibilities? What are we going to do about it? Brainstorm solutions, list possibilities, prioritize actions. This can take the longest of all of them, especially if they're on a whole lot of good alternatives, or there are hundreds of alternatives, or hundreds of ways of doing this. But basically, this is that analysis skill that we discussed. And then their 5th stage is called generalization and transfer of learning. Are you really going to do something about it? This is our supporting skill when we're talking about coaching, isn't it? This is the deal where we're going to now get them to do something. What would be the skill? One skill we haven't talked about. I've listed all the other skills except for one. What haven't we not listed here? How about confronting? Remember the session that we had on confronting skills? Why would this one fit? Because when we're confronting, that is when maybe they didn't do what they agreed they were going to do, and you're going to have to say, well, we agreed last week that you were going to do this assignment, you were going to go out and check into this alternative, and you didn't do it. I'm confused. I thought you were really motivated and you wanted to do this, but you're not doing it. What does that mean? So the confronting comes. So you see those 5 stages. And of course they can be used in a much shorter version. Let's call this a short context. Develop rapport, draw off the facts. What is the goal? Help them generate ideas before giving advice, and suggest specific follow-up actions. Now, what if we have a nonverbal person? Isn't going to talk to you very much. How do we still use those same stages and those same skills? The first one is we need to get very concrete and clear about abstract concepts. What kind of questions would we use here? If you can't get anything out of the person, what kind of questions do you go to? Remember, closed questions. Instead of using the open questions and so on, you say, okay, do you want to do this or do you not want to do this? We have to get them specific. Define the problem to search specific examples. Listen for concrete, detailed stories. See, they might not be able to tell you, and you say, well, just tell me what happened. Or tell me a story like that. Somehow you've got to draw them out and try and get the information. Set concrete, observable goals. The more they're nonverbal, the more they're resistant and so on, the more you've got to get things very concrete. Okay. Now we agreed this session that you're going to do this. Are you really going to do it? Yes or no? Ask specific questions to generate alternatives. Well, I think we can do this, this, and this. How do you think they would turn out? Which one do you think would be best? Which one are you willing to try? And then make very concrete plans. Now we can apply all the stuff that we're talking about here to all sorts of different things. We can apply it to groups, we could apply it to family sessions and so on. It's just that the more complex you get, it's a fairly simple thing. Well, if I've got 15 people sitting there, it gets more complex. I have to direct it to different people and put the pieces together more. It just makes it more complex, but it's still all the same stuff. Okay, so that's integration. Basically, we put it together in some sort of a form of sequence, and we use the different things as we need them, and we try to get you focused primarily on the goal. Because, see, when do you really get in trouble doing this? If you look at yourself and you say, you know what, how am I doing? I wonder, am I doing the right thing? If you want to integrate this all, you've got to quit doing that. And you've got to focus on the client's problem, the client's situation, what's going on here, and then it will all integrate for you. You have to get your eyes off yourself. The more subconscious you are worried about yourself or how you're doing, the more this is going to be mechanical and not fit together. And the more you focus in on the client and on their problems and what you're trying to accomplish, the more it will all integrate and come together. Okay? The next topic we need to look at is planning. How are we going to plan for these particular things? And I'm going to break this into two different sessions, and I'm going to show you again the different skills in the planning process. I'm going to start out with coaching, and then we'll go on to counseling. The first thing, if we look at our different coaching things that we do, are 12 steps. The first thing under dreaming is establishing the relationship. What do we have to do? That way, under the structure of the 5 steps, I'm just showing they all integrate here. The first step was developing rapport. Remember, that's when we were attending and connecting. Then under dreaming, we had self-evaluation. This is gathering information. So that's observing, questioning, and feeling. Then under finding the dream, they call it determining outcomes or summarizing. And then we count the cost. I'm showing you that the skills we've given you in this course give you all the skills that you need to coach. Or they give you all the skills that you need to counsel. These are the basic skills. Under planning, we need to make a plan. Under their phases we talked about, exploring alternatives and generating solutions. And this is analysis. We've got, in planning, we have to analyze what's going on and determine what needs to be done. And then under supporting, of course, we have acting, overcoming discouragement, remaining faithful, overcoming obstacles, owning the vision, accepting the mantle, passing the mantle on, and so on. They call this generalization and transfer of learning in the 5 phases that we just gave you. This is attending, observing, reflecting feelings, questioning, analysis, confronting, and summarizing. This is it all put together in that particular phase. So do you see that the skills that we have give you the skills you need to do all you need to do in coaching, to meet those core competencies, to meet the different things we have. How about in counseling planning? What are the steps now in making a counseling plan? The first thing, of course, is we do an intake in counseling. We call it an intake, which uses attending, connecting, emphatic listening. Once we get the intake, then we gather all the pieces together, don't we? We ask all these questions about, well, how are you feeling? When did it happen? What's going on? What happened in your life? We gather maybe their entire life history, whatever we need. We gather all of these pieces, and then we stick them together into analysis, using that analysis skill. And we're using questioning, feeling, and analysis skills. What is the goal? What is hindering the goal? What is the real problem? What is the need or the root problem? What is the spiritual problem? We pull all those things together and we try and make sense out of it and paint ourselves a picture here of what is going on. Once we have that picture, then what do we have to come up with? The plan. And this is where planning fits into counseling. Because would it be nice to have a plan of what you're going to do with this client before you start doing it? Of course, the Holy Spirit can direct you in individual sessions, but we need an overall plan. Under the plan, we have to determine what the problem is. That's what we just did. Then we need goals and outcomes, and we need methods. So a plan's going to look like what? Here's the problem. Here are the goals. Here are my methods and outcomes that I want. That's what a plan is going to look like, and we're going to practice that later on in this session. And then, of course, in counseling, I need to execute the plan. If it doesn't work, I need to modify it, and eventually, I'm going to terminate. So that's sort of the overall counseling method. Now realize there are many more complex methods. In other classes, we teach you those, like 10-step methods, 12-step methods of counseling, and so on. But this is the general overall picture of coaching and the overall picture of planning. But even if we do that, we have to document it all, right? So what are the kind of documents that you need if you're a coach or if you're a counselor? And in different situations, there's going to be quite a few different documents. In fact, if there's a problem in the whole area of counseling, it's all the documentation that's being required and how much they want. Because they want more and more and more, and they want to be more and more specific, and they want it more and more integrated, and they want it more and more concrete. In other words, well, this is what I'm going to do, and when this is done, my counseling's done. Because the insurance company doesn't want to pay you for just helping this person for the rest of their life. They want it to be, they came in with this problem, we're going to resolve this problem, and we know this problem is taken care of. And they want what's called solution focused. What does that mean? Let's just take care of the symptoms. They don't really want you to go that deep because they don't want to pay money for fixing this person's entire life. They just want to take what the critical issue is, let's deal with that critical issue and stay focused on that particular thing. Now, under coaching, remember that there are no rules under coaching. So you can do anything you want to in the area of documentation. Let me give you what we suggest for you. Okay? In coaching, we have a general information form, which is basically, this is the data you want to gather. Of course, you want to have just a form that says, an intake form that says this is the person's name and address, and et cetera, that kind of thing. A coaching contract. So you have a very specific idea of what's going to be done and what they're going to get for their money in this statement. Then we need a mission statement. Remember what that looked like, a specific 1 or 2 lines, very concrete, specific of what the goal is. A mission plan. This is a list. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's how I'm going to get from point A to point B. We suggest you need progress notes. Although there's no law that says you have to do this, because that way if you have to go back and review what's going on, you have something to go back and review, and you know what's going on, and if someone's supervising you, you can show them what's going on, and you have the data, and you're not forgetting it. And finally, if you're taking payment, you need a payment report. That's primary coaching. How about mental health counseling? Well, in our counseling center, the first thing is we do an intake. That's a basic form. It can have a lot of information in it. Some insurance companies require you to gather all this entire stuff, 2 sides, sheets of a paper or something, all this data about how they're feeling and checking off all these things of, well, are they angry? Are they sad? Are they feeling hopeless? Do they have suicidal intent? And so we have whole forms that just have a total amount of data on that. Informed consent. In counseling, you need to tell them, okay, this is what I'm going to do for you. This is what I expect out of you. Is that acceptable to you? And you need to get them to sign that. And of course, it talks about confidentiality and how many, this will be confidential except for suicide, homicide, or child or elder abuse, and so on. And you make it clear to them what the rules of the game are. And this is required in the area of counseling. Then releases of information. If they're a child, if you're going to do video counseling, if you're going to release to the courts, you can't give any information out unless you have a signed release of information in their records. Insurance. If they're taking insurance, you've got to gather all this information and fill out all these insurance forms. Diagnostic interview. If you're going to do a DSM-4 diagnosis, and most people in this class will not have that because you have to be licensed in this state to do that. You have to be licensed at the clinical level in this state to do the DSM-4 diagnosis. So you're probably not going to be doing that, but if you do, there are a lot of information that you gather to reach that, and you compare it against DSM-4 to determine if they meet the criteria or not to come up with this diagnosis. Then a counseling plan. That's what we've talked about earlier. Basically, you need to have, here's the problem, here's what we're going to do about it, and here's the outcome. The goals and the outcome. And then progress notes. There are 2 different main ways of doing progress notes. But some insurance companies are going to require you to do it in their format or the way they want it. So I want to talk a bit more about this. The most normal way that people do progress notes is you just write down, this is the person, this is the date, and then their names that were there, and then you go and just write down basically what you did. They said this and this and this, and I did this and this and this. And it's a general overall thing, and they seem like they're improving or they're not improving. But can you see that can be as short as just a couple lines. One statement that I've heard concerning this is this. Write your progress notes as if both a lawyer and your client were watching you write them. Now, if you do that, what are you going to do? Not write a whole lot, right? You're going to write just a little bit to protect yourself from lawsuits and everything else. But do you think that's going to be good enough for your insurance company? There's a whole balance here in the thing. Most people write just general notes, but I'm going to talk about what is called the SOAP note. S-O-A-P. And we're going to have you actually do one of those so you get an idea here of what that looks like. And it stands for subjective. Now, what's subjective? Subjective is what the person tells you, what they're saying, how they see it. It's from their viewpoint, isn't it? That's what subjective means. Then objective. It means other data that you have, like in the way of testing, or you see that in the session they were crying. That's objective because they did that. Or they got out and they stormed out of your session. That's objective. It's not a question of interpretation, it's what they actually did. So you know it's concrete stuff that is in addition to that, in addition to the subjective. Then you have the assessment. It's you take the subjective data, you take the objective data, and you give your assessment of what you think that all means. And you might say, okay, I think that all means this person has this particular problem and so on and so forth. Therefore, in this session, this is what I'm doing to solve that problem. That's the last one, the P, which is the plan. And the plan isn't just what you plan to do, it's what you actually did in the session. It's how you planned to deal with what you assessed the problem was. So do you see those 4? Which one do you think is probably going to be the shortest one of those 4 in most sessions? How about the objective? Because you're not going to have that much data. Now, if you did a lot of testing, that could be pretty long. So each one is going to be different of how much data you get. Normally the subjective one, because the client's going to be sitting there telling you all this stuff, and you're gathering all this information, that's your gathering information one. That's normally going to be your longest one. Or maybe the plan, if you did a lot to try to really help this person. You reframe this, you talk to them about that, you use systematic desensitization to try and help them get over this fear. In that case, maybe the entire session is that. So there would be very little on the other lines. But do you see how that concretely gives a complete picture of what went on in that session? The kind of things that insurance companies sort of like. They want to know what you're doing and why you're doing it and what your goals were. Of course, they would also like to have under there in your assessment is, when is it going to be over? You know, when I finally get this person that their anger is down to a 3 out of 10 scale, self-reported, then I believe that our counseling has been successful. So they're looking for quantifiable goals in there too. And of course, that SOAP thing is the same thing that doctors use, psychiatrists use, and so on and so forth. So therefore, if you're doing it at a clinical level, you're working in a hospital or someplace like that, they're primarily going to expect you to do it in the SOAP note type of thing that's going on. Another area, though, of documentation, where we have a lot of documentation, is in drug and alcohol counseling. And this is actually mandated by the state. If you're a licensed drug and alcohol outpatient clinic, you have to do it this way. One of them is what here is called the KCPC, the Kansas Client Placement Criteria. So instead of you taking notes like you normally do, you got this whole thing that's about 5 pages deep. And you got to ask them all these questions to gather all this information, and then based on how they answer the questions, you determine if you can even treat them. Because they might have to go to inpatient because they're so bad. You also have to give them testing. The requirement is you have to use at least 2 different methods of testing their addictions. We normally use the SASI, the Substance Abuse Subtle Screening Inventory, and the DSM-4 criteria to deal with that in the overall testing. You have to have a release of information because most people that come to us are in the courts, and so they sign a release. You have to have a counseling plan, and that plan has to be updated every 90 days. And it has to be signed by the client. You have to have progress notes, probation reports, any reports that you send, or any releases you send to the probation officer, or anything else like that. You have to have a termination summary. So you have all this documentation, and when you get inspected every year, guess what they look at? All this documentation, especially the confidentiality. Do you have a release for every single thing you release to somebody? And so it's actually more of the documentation that you're graded on than actually how well you help the person. They also do ask you, though, to do an evaluation of your overall program. So it gives you an idea of how much of this stuff we have. Well, now let's get a bit more concrete. What I'm going to do is a couple examples here. And I'm going to sort of read you the information in the case. And this first one, I want you to give me a plan. And in this plan, what I want is I want you to identify the problems in this case, identify the goals in this case, and the methods you would use to resolve the goals. So you might want to just take a sheet of paper and write down problems for a list, the goals that I would want, and the methods, okay? Because that's going to be your plan. And we're going to have you actually do it, and then I'll tell you what I came up with in this same situation, okay? Here is the situation. John has come to counseling at the insistence of his wife, who threatened to call the police if he did not get help for his anger. She said that he blew up because the dishes were stacked in the sink again, cussed her out, and threw her down a flight of stairs. When she did not respond, he left her for dead. This is the worst incident to date in their 10-year marriage. He was drinking. He says she made him angry because she always threatens to leave him and never keeps the house clean. She does not function as a housewife, watches soap operas, reads romance novels, and spends most of her time on the internet. He is extremely jealous of her attempts to make outside friends and has threatened to destroy the computer. He believes she is having an internet affair. Both have not been to church for a long time. He has a good reputation at work and has recently been promoted. Both blame the other for their marriage problems. John was abandoned by both parents at birth and brought up in a series of foster homes. His wife was brought up in an alcoholic family. Okay, that's the data that you gathered. Now, put it together and make your plan. We'll take a break. I hope by now you've had time to come up with your list of problems and of your plan overall of how you would treat these problems. I'll give you some that I wrote down. You can sort of check off the ones that you have and so on. Problems. First is domestic violence. Appears that he's a classical domestic violence abuser. All the pieces fit together. Verbal abuse, jealousy, left for dead, John's fear of abandonment. All tell us that this is probably a classical domestic violence type of problem. He also has a drinking problem. One thing we know is that about 80% of all domestic violence is accompanied by drinking. Question, does she have a romance addiction? She has all the pieces for that. Of a romance addiction. Is she really having an internet affair? He may be jealous irrationally, but she might actually be having one. Codependency, clearly underlying all of this. Spirituality, they haven't been to church for a long time. So they're relying so much on the flesh. And both of them have a history of past hurts, being insecure and so on, growing up in an alcoholic family and so on. That's what I have for my list of problems. So what would be my goals then in the plan? Okay, my first goal would be stop the domestic violence, stop the drinking, stop the romance addiction, stop the internet affair if it exists, stop criticism, stop threats of abandonment, and set boundaries. Now what would my method be? My method would be slowly having them work out their steps one step at a time as they come together. And to set good boundaries so that we don't end up these things happening again, and good consequences so that they don't happen again. What are my long-term goals and methods? I'd want to get him in a domestic violence program, into a drug alcohol program, her into a codependency program and support groups. I want to build their spiritual strength through support groups, church, and whatever other means that I could do. I want to deal with the past issues, maybe using what I call Monday morning quarterbacking and forgiveness. And then I'd want to work after all of that. I'd want to work in reconciling the marriage one step at a time and putting it all together. Because what if I try to put the marriage all together here before I resolve some of these issues? All we're going to do is have more hurt and more pain and more problems. So do you see how the plan comes sort of from the overall picture? Okay? Now I'm going to give you another case, and I want you to write the SOAP notes for this case. I'm going to give you the actual counseling of a case, and I want you to put down, remember SOAP is the subjective, the objective, the assessment, and then the plan. And I want you to write down how you would do that if you were a counselor, this was your session, and what you did in the session, and what you would write on each one of those lines. Now, one of the things that's normally in SOAP notes is the DSM-4 diagnosis, but because you're not qualified in that, I'm not going to ask you to do that. But normally you would be putting down who the client is, who attended the session, the date and the time, and so on. I'm not going to give that to you, so I'm not expecting that either. I'm expecting primarily the subjective, objective assessment and plan. That's what we're looking for here. Here's the story, okay? Robert brought his wife to counseling because he has just learned that she is having an affair and doesn't want the marriage to break up, but he appears very angry. When he found out, he cussed her out and slapped her. Kathy, his wife, says she's feel neglected by her workaholic husband and has been treated nicely by her new boss at the office. Twice when they were working late alone, something just happened. John wants her to quit her job. They're short of money, and when Robert told her that she has to quit her job, she started to cry. Her boss is 20 years older, married, and much like her father that died 3 years ago. She was her father's favorite child. He always supported her in everything she wanted to do and loved her without condition. Robert is many times critical of her since she does not cook or keep the house as he expected she would do. She says she could never please him no matter how hard she tried, so she quit trying. The counseling session ended with no resolution over whether she would keep her job or not. I want you to take that information and write your soap notes for that. We'll take a short break so you can do that. I hope that by now you've had time to write your soap notes. Remember, these are simply the notes of the session that I had described to you. And I'll read to you the soap notes that I produced in this particular situation. I'm going to give you all the lines of the complete soap notes. The first line I have says the client is Robert Brown, and then I'm giving a DSM-4 diagnosis here. I didn't expect you to do that, but normally you would provide that. And the axis 1 is 309.4, which is an adjustment disorder. Axis 2 is V79.01, which means there is no problem in the area of personality disorders. Axis 3, which is medical, says none. Axis 4, which is social, says an affair, and I gave a general, a GAF of 50, which means they're not that dysfunctional, but they are definitely having struggles. That's what a 50 says. The session was on January 22nd, 2006. It was from 1:05 to 2:50 p.m. It's a 90847, which means there was family counseling, more than one person in the session. I am the counselor, and I would have signed this. My signature would be there in this soap note. And this is what I have down. Subjective. Client reports that after he found out that his wife had 2 one-night stand affairs with her boss, he cussed her out and slapped her. She states that she felt neglected by her husband and that her boss paid attention to her. Client wants his wife to quit her job even though they have financial problems. She feels that no matter what she does, it will not be good enough for him. Objective. Client presents as very angry. Wife cried during session when asked to quit her job. Assessment. This is a classical work-type affair where the wife felt neglected and connected with her boss, who was like her father who died 3 years ago. Husband fears the affair will continue if she does not quit her job. Short-term solution-focused goal for this session is to help them negotiate ending the affair so they can begin work on forgiveness and restoring the marriage. Because her boss is 20 years older and married, this affair probably has no future. Long-term quantifiable goal is to set appropriate boundaries and restore the marriage to the point where it is acceptable to both partners. Plan. My initial goal in this session was to gather intake information and help both of them understand the other's point of view. I explained my analysis to them that although having an affair is never justified, many affairs like this one do occur when one mate is needy, in this case feeling neglected and still grieving her supportive father, and someone else meets that need. I attempted unsuccessfully to get them to resolve the issue of her quitting her job during this session. So you see those notes and how it sort of just takes the session, I reorganize the information, and I just put it in those categories to make sense of what's going on, so someone else reading it can put the entire picture together. Now what I'm going to do is give you one more session, one more example, and this one I want you to do both, and this is going to be your homework. What I want you to do with this session is I want you to make up your plan for this particular couple. Gather the evidence, get the goals and the methods that you would have, and then I want you to pretend that you're doing the first session. And then I want you to write your soap notes, assuming you did this session perfectly according to your plan and what the soap notes would look like. So here is your third exercise. And again, you don't have to, I'm not asking you to do the DSM-4 diagnosis and so on if you haven't taken that course at this point. Pam and Mike are having extreme rebellion problems with their teenage daughter, Lori, who is 15. Mike thinks that Pam is too easy on Lori, who spends most of her time shopping and talking to her friends on the phone. Lori is currently failing 2 of her classes and has been suspended from school twice for smoking and drinking at school activities. Until recently, Lori was the ideal child, the firstborn of 3 girls. The secondborn has recently begun getting straight A's, is good at sports, and seems to be Mike's favorite. Although Pam goes along with whatever Mike wants, as she thinks a submissive wife should, she feels Mike's discipline is too harsh. Her own father was always harsh, and she is afraid that the girls won't like her if she disciplines them, so she pretty much lets them do whatever they want to do when Mike is away, which is most of the time. The last time Lori came home drunk, he beat the rebellion out of her with his belt, as he thinks the Bible says. The family goes to a legalistic holiness type of church where makeup is not allowed and women are required to wear long dresses. Again, your assignment is to come up with the problems and the goals and the methods of your plan, and then to write what your first session would look like in soap notes. So what have we tried to do today? We've tried to take all of those skills that you had, integrate them together, and then teach you 2 new skills. One is making a plan and planning your counseling session or your coaching session, and then doing soap notes, being able to document that in an effective way. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you've given us the chance to help other people. And we ask, Lord, that you would help every person here to take these skills that we've taught, to integrate them together, to become a total whole, and to learn how to be an effective planner, and to learn how to effectively document things so that they can truly help people. And we give you all the glory and the honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way. Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other.